Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope you've had an awesome week. I just got back from Moab, Utah, where me and my son and the boys in our ward were all there for 4 or 5 days for young men's camp. Had a lot of fun. And during that time, I had a discussion with some of the leaders, and then even today in Teachers Quorum, I brought this topic up that we're going to be talking about today to get some additional perspectives as I've been reflecting on this. And the example that I shared to kind of kick off the discussion in Teachers Quorum today was this gal I'm connected to online named April. She got so fed up with all of the Pride Month rainbow flags on all the corporate logos and the flags and all the just heavy in your face kind of coordinated political propaganda, if you will. She decided to speak out for what she believed, where all these other people were using, Pride Month, as it's called, to stand up for what they believe. She and her husband produced the Proclamation on the Family. For those of you who have seen it, that kind of standard design document of the Proclamation on the Family, they produced it onto a really big sheet and turned that into a flag. And they hung that up in their home and took a picture in front of it and shared it on social media to say, hey, everyone else is, posting about what they believe and what they support and their thoughts on, gender and marriage and men and women's roles and so forth. So we thought we would do the same. So she posts it, and whoo boy, massive backlash. I mean, that tweet went viral. She's only got 1,500 or 1,600 followers on Twitter, and it got over 10 million views and criticism galore. People are writing articles about it and, quote tweeting it and attacking her and all this stuff. And it's that incident that has led me to reflect this week on today's topic, which is how do you reconcile civility with civic engagement? Can you truly engage in the public square and stand up for truth and defend the truth and proclaim the gospel and all these things? Can you engage that way and do so civilly? Of course, we've been hearing this message a lot recently from President Nelson and others talking about the need for civility and, Christ-like conduct and all this stuff, right? And I'm not going to say that's not important. I agree that we should do it. But I just wonder what it actually looks like, because we often consider Christ a peacemaker, and we call him the Prince of Peace, and he was and he is, and yet that doesn't mean he wasn't contentious, or that he didn't ruffle feathers, or that he didn't upset people, or anything like that, right? Quite the opposite. He said, "Think not that I am come to bring peace, but a sword." To set father against son and brother against brother. He's talking about how the gospel is inherently divisive. And that when you stand for truth, you are going to alienate those who reject it, those who disagree. You're going to upset them. It's going to be contentious. And yet you do it anyways. I mean, there's the scripture in John 2, when this is Jesus and the money changers in the temple. It says, the Jews' Passover was at hand. Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple people who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers sitting there. And then it says, this is verse 15, John 2:15. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out their money and overthrew the tables, and said, "Get these things out of here. Don't make my Father's house a house of merchandise." What I find fascinating about that is it says he goes to the temple, he finds all this happening, and when he had made a whip, basically, a scourge of small cords, then he went and drove them out of the temple. This was not a reactionary thing. It wasn't that he just picked up something and, threatened the money changers. He sat down and made his own scourge. It was this very intentional act of even physical violence. I'm sure he didn't, actually probably whip anyone. It was more probably just a threat or whatever. But he He acted in a way that I think many in our culture would find inconsistent with being a peacemaker. Here's a guy who intentionally fashioned a weapon to go attack or threaten to attack individuals who were doing something wrong. And so how do you reconcile that? Because when we're told to have Christ-like conduct, does that Christ-like conduct include not bringing a peace but bringing a sword? Does it include making our own proverbial scourges to go after wickedness, and be intentional about trying to drive out wickedness? I would think that if we're focusing on Christ-like conduct, it can't just be the love everyone. Jesus said to love your neighbor, and right, because it's not about affirming people in what they believe. It's not about being an ally. It's not about supporting people in what they're doing and you do you and live and let live and all the rest, right? Quite the opposite. It's here is God's law. Here is the truth. I can lovingly say what I believe. I can not be rude about it, but I can be very firm in saying what you're doing, I believe, is wrong. And I think that's a sin, or I think that's a mistake, or I think that violates what God has said. And that's going to be divisive. I mean, think of the Old Testament prophets, right? They would go rebuke the king for being wicked and causing all the people to be wicked. And the kings never took that message well. They would always try, and in many cases succeeded, in killing the messenger, the prophet, because they wanted to put a stop to being rebuked rather than changing their ways. It's like 2 Nephi, the guilty taketh the truth to be hard, for it cutteth them to the very center. And so the pattern throughout scriptural history is that those who are standing for truth are divisive. It doesn't mean they have to be rude or boisterous or, rebuking people or calling them names or anything like that. But the pattern is very clear that when people are standing for truth and kind of advancing a particular idea or standing for a doctrinal principle, that they're going to make a lot of enemies. And that's just kind of inherent in the process. And so with this gal, April, there's one article that was written. They called it the Proclamation on the Family. They called it an anti-pride flag. An anti-pride flag. And I thought that was so interesting. It reminded me a lot of when Ron Paul was in Congress, and he would be branded by his critics as anti-war, right? Or anti-government. That's a big thing we hear a lot today, these anti-government groups, or anti-war. And Dr. Paul would always flip it around and say, I'm not anti-war, I'm pro-peace. I'm not anti-government, I'm pro-liberty. And so the critics always trying to cast this in a negative light, that, you have this position, it must mean that you hate the thing that you disagree with. You're anti-pride because you put up a flag advancing a particular theology and set of principles that is in conflict with LGBTQ plus IA 2SL, blah, blah, whatever it is today, because you said or did something that is inconsistent with affirming all those things and flying your own rainbow flag and towing the political line. Because you did something different, you must be anti-pride. You must be bigoted. What's interesting is in October 2005, General Conference, Russell Ballard said this. So this is 18 years ago. He said, "Today I call upon members of the church and on committed parents, grandparents, and extended family members everywhere to hold fast to this great proclamation on the family, to make it a banner, not unlike General Moroni's title of liberty, and to commit ourselves to live by its precepts. As we are all part of a family, the proclamation applies to everyone." So it's fascinating to me. I don't know if this gal April knew of that talk or had that in mind or anything, but it's fascinating that in 2005, here's President Ballard literally saying, hey, this proclamation is so important that we should consider hoisting it as a flag, and being very open and bold in proclaiming that, gender is an essential characteristic of premortal identity. That marriage is between a man and a woman, that there are different roles for different genders, that, and so he's basically saying, let's be open about this. let's hoist it as a flag even. And then here comes this gal who does it. She's roundly attacked, widely criticized as being a bigot and anti-pride and everything else. So was she civil? She posted a photo. She shared her views. I read a few of her tweets. It didn't look like she was being a jerk or unkind towards those she disagreed with, but she chose to stand up and openly kind of proclaim what she believed. And in years past, when I've kind of done this from like a war and peace issue, I'll do it like on Veterans Day or Memorial Day or something like that, right? Or 9/11, reminding people of all the atrocities that have been committed in the name of vengeance over 9/11. And so I will, on those holidays, when everyone's focused on that particular memorialization or commemoration or whatever, I will bring up kind of the counterpoint about, hey, we got to keep this in mind. And consistently, many people criticize me for doing that because they say, not today, right? Do this on a different day. Today should be about whatever the day is, right? And save your views for tomorrow. So I can see with this gal April, some probably have felt, oh no, this is Pride Month. You can't do or say anything different. Let us have our entire month. Everyone else just gets a day here and there for their own celebrations. We get a month. And when the month is over, fine, go share your bigoted views. But how dare you try, and infringe on our month. Marion Romney, 1955 at a BYU devotional. He said that there are those among us who are trying to serve the Lord without offending the devil. Then he said, must the choice lie irrevocably between peace on the one hand, obtained by compliance with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and contention and war on the other hand? So saying there's some people that we're trying to be good Latter-day Saints, we're trying to be good Christians, we're trying to do what God wants us to do, as long as we don't offend other people. Like, coming from California, being one of the California Mormons that would always criticize the Utah Mormons, and now having been here for 24 years, and my children are Utah Mormons, and like trying to make sure that they don't just get, soak up the culture that we're a part of. Because as any listener of these musings knows, I'm critical of church culture, and a lot of that is Utah culture, and so one of the things that I find so problematic about our church/Utah culture, and I don't know how to separate the two on this particular issue, is not wanting to offend other people, right? I don't want to offend them. I don't want to say something that might make them upset. They might leave the church if I say this thing that they don't like. If they consider me to be, offensive in any way, then maybe they'll stop coming to church. And so out of an abundance of caution, and because contention is of the devil, I'm just not going to say anything because it might upset the other person. So better that I remain silent and just be nice and just love them. I'll just love them. I'll keep my views to myself. I'll keep the things that concern me silent. And I don't think I need to say, because I think it's plainly obvious, but the effect of that in the aggregate, as many people behave in that way and withdraw from stating their views and engaging publicly or standing for what they believe in, respectfully, you don't have to be a jerk about it, right? But as people shy away from saying anything that could be contentious or that others might disagree with, we're allowing those who are the most vocal and domineering and aggressive to advance their agenda or views that we might disagree with far more successfully and quickly than they otherwise would, because we're not contending. We're not engaging. As I said, I brought this up in teacher's quorum today and asked the boys, I shared with them this story of this gal hoisting her flag. And I said, do you think she was wrong? Do you think she was right? Do you think she was being uncivil, or was she being civil about it? And some of the boys felt like and said that, well, it's maybe what she should have done is just have a flag like that in her own home, right? So like if anyone comes to her home on her turf and sees it, they can ask her about it. She can share her views about it. And then it's like limited, right? To her home, and not trying to like shove it in other people's faces or anything like that. I was like, okay, that's an interesting point of view. I argued the opposite. I brought up kind of a counterpoint. I said, in the parable where Jesus is talking about the light, city on the hill and the light, and the light under the bushel, right? He's like, do people light a candle only to hide it under a bushel and, hide the light? Well, no, people light a candle so that it can illuminate, the whole room or whatever. And so the point of shining your light or standing for truth or defending the gospel is to do so openly and broadly and boldly. One of the boys made an interesting point in rebuttal, you might say, and that is, he said, well, is there a difference between, imagine like a lantern where it's just kind of radiating light openly versus having a flashlight that you shine in someone's face, right? You're being or like a laser, you might even say, right? Like you're being kind of aggressive about it, singling someone out, target. I'm like, hey, that's actually, I kind of like that idea, right? Because this gal, April, I don't think she was attacking any one person. She wasn't calling anyone out. She wasn't directly replying to anyone where it was clear it was like an attack on them or whatever. She was just noticing a general trend that she was concerned with. And as others were very openly proclaiming their beliefs, she decided to engage and share her own. So in that sense, I feel like that's more of the lantern style, where she's just over here saying, here's what I believe and here's why I think that's important. And putting her ideas out there, not targeting them or laser pointing them at anyone in particular. So I thought that was a fair point, right? That we can be bold in standing for the ideas that we believe in, and we can be public about it and actively so, without going after anyone in particular, right? You can focus on ideas rather than individuals, principles over people, so that no one in particular feels attacked. Now, a lot of people are still going to feel offended. They're going to call you a bigot. They're going to call you a jerk. They're going to say you're behind the times, or you're, whatever, right? They're going to say all kinds of stuff. But that's kind of par for the course. I mean, you look at Jesus, right? I look at Matthew 23, and here's where Jesus is like going after the scribes and Pharisees, and not in a nice way. He's saying, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, ye hypocrites! For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. You neither go in yourselves, nor do you suffer them that are entering to go in. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you compass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he's made, you make him twofold more than the child of hell than yourselves. Woe unto you, you blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it's nothing. But whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor, right? You fools, you blind. He says it again, you fools, you blind. Again, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Blind guides, again, boom, 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 boom. I'm just looking down the list, all these verses, and he's going after these people. He's very bold in doing so. And, obviously he can get away with it. He's God. But to me, when we say that we need to have Christ-like conduct, we have to balance that against all of Christ's conduct. We create this like mythical Jesus who was just lovey-dovey all the time and spoke in dulcet tones, soft whispering voice, and was only ever kind and loving and supportive. And he was, absolutely. But when I read the Gospels, I see elements of Jesus where he was rather bold in standing for God's law and rebuking, as did the prophets of old. Or think of like Samuel the Lamanite up on the wall, right? Calling out people in general. I guess sometimes they also called out particular leaders and others, but rebuking people for their wickedness and admonishing them to be righteous and calling a spade a spade. And so it seems that our culture has shied away from that and and only focused on the Jesus that was nice. And therefore we should be nice and we should just stand for what we believe and be kind and so forth. And that's not wrong. I just wonder if it's incomplete a little bit. So in 2009, the church put out an article in the newsroom. At the time, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. They had some guy overseeing all the church's PR stuff, and they were a lot more active in posting stuff through the newsroom rather than under the pen of the first presidency. And I recall in what was called the bloggernacle, kind of the LDS blogosphere at the time, there was always this kind of debate happening about like how authoritative these newsroom articles were, and were they being reviewed? Was the PR team going rogue? How much supervision and approval did all these things have? Because it would just be these, like in this particular case, this article I'm going to read an excerpt from, it was just a quote unquote commentary on the church's official newsroom website. Now, knowing what I know about kind of how this stuff works, like the church's newsroom and PR team has always been overseen by a few apostles, and they are kind of the ones primarily responsible for overseeing and approving, what comes out through the newsroom. So in this case, in 2009, it was an article called The Latter-day Saint Ethic of Civility. And I'm only going to read a few portions. It's semi-long. It begins by talking about the condition of the world. Political world is astir. Economies are faltering. Public trust is waning. Individuals feel vulnerable, and social cohesion wears thin. Meanwhile, stories of rage and agitation fill our airwaves, streets, and town halls. Where are the voices of balance and moderation in these extreme times? So, first reaction there is, I think moderation is a flawed political principle, and to be calling it out as some type of ideal that, where there's two extremes, the proper approach is in the middle. Then you get into like the Hegelian dialectic, right? The further out you can push one side, you bring the other side a bit further in that direction, still keeping some distance. So the midpoint is much further in whatever bad direction you want to go. So now you're at a new midpoint. Well, then the extreme gets even more extreme, reacting to and relative to that new midpoint. So the midpoint is constantly being pushed in one direction. So to say, where are the voices of moderation in these extreme times? Like, one might argue that Jesus was extreme. I think he was perceived that way by many of his critics, right? His followers were considered extreme. They were attacked, they were rebuked, they were persecuted. So I don't know that we can just dismiss being extreme as a problem. I guess it depends on how you define that term. You can be fully committed to and publicly sharing the gospel while still being respectful and kind enough to not be considered extreme, maybe. But like the implications of some of the doctrines that we stand for are considered, hateful and bigoted and antiquated and maybe even extreme by a lot of people. So maybe being extreme is in the eye of the beholder. I don't know that we want voices of moderation as some, and maybe they meant something different by it, but as I understand that term, it was kind of like, huh? A little bit later, they say, President Gordon Hinckley once said that living together in communities with respect and concern for one another is the hallmark of civilization. And then they observed in the commentary, that hallmark is under increasing threat. So living together in communities with respect and concern for one another is the hallmark of civilization. That hallmark is under increasing threat. I don't disagree with that. I think that's even more evident now, however many, 14 years later, since they said that. So then they go on and talk about the challenges to modern society and the fabric. It says, the fabric of civil society tears when stretched thin by its extremities. Civility, then, becomes the measure of our collective and individual character as citizens of a democracy. Ugh. I do not consider myself a citizen of a democracy. I've talked in another musing, was it the one on New Year, New World Order in January? how there have been a lot of statements from President Nelson and others of the church about being a good global citizen. I don't want to be a good global citizen. I don't know what that even means. I don't know where your allegiance lies when you're a citizen of the globe or of the global community or a citizen of democracy. Democracy is not a virtue. It's majoritarian control. It's a popularity contest. It's tyranny of the majority. So, there's a reason why the founders were not the biggest fans of democracy and tried to structure a government that could tame its excesses and restrain its effects. I don't know that they succeeded. Anyways, topic for another day. But to say that civility is the measure of our collective and individual character as citizens of a democracy, I don't even know what that means. Number one, I don't want to be a citizen of democracy. I want to be a citizen of the kingdom of God. And civility is the measure of our collective and individual character. They said a healthy democracy maintains equilibrium through diversity. Like a healthy democracy, again, I don't know what or why. Only a couple more excerpts I'll read. There's a lot here. Rather than exempting itself from the rules of law and civility, the church has sought the path of cooperative engagement and avoided the perils of acrimonious confrontation. This, of course, relates to last week's musing, where the church put out a new statement on political neutrality and issued a letter about it on the website, saying that in general, they no longer in the future will engage in or comment on geopolitical international issues. They'll show up with, diapers and formula and peanut butter and wheat through humanitarian efforts to whatever crisis emerges. They just will refrain from talking about the crisis itself and the international tensions and so forth. So here, 14 years ago, the church newsroom saying that the church has sought the path of cooperative engagement and avoided the perils of acrimonious confrontation. And I've talked a lot about how I think a lot of the burdens and obligations are individual in nature, not institutional in nature, and that it is an individual responsibility to stand for truth and hoist a proclamation flag on your yard if you want, and be a bit more bold in advancing these ideas, where the church has some other considerations and constraints, perhaps, right? Having to focus on keeping the doors to missionaries open, and as an institution, maybe not trying to, go to war with some other horrible government that is doing something stupid. And if we call them out, then they, shut down our churches and attack our members and so on and so forth. So I can understand, and I long have understood, that the church has other incentives and priorities and decisions that they're making in light of all of those things, but that doesn't absolve us of having the individual responsibility to still act. And the unfortunate thing about our culture, as I've said before, is that too many people wait for the church to decide what to do and act. And if they don't see church leaders doing or saying something, then they themselves will not do or say that thing either. So if the church is not engaged in what they called acrimonious confrontation, then the members aren't as well. And then we collectively disengage in the public square because we don't want to offend anyone. We just want to have cooperative engagement. And so we walk on eggshells around everyone, and we don't really talk about our controversial doctrine that much, except in controlled circumstances like general conference or in a chapel during Sunday school. But even then, it's kind of prickly. You don't want to bring up something political because people might get upset, or you don't want to talk about these current cultural issues that we're dealing with and how they relate to the gospel because someone might get upset. So let's just not talk about these things at church at all, just so that we can all, be kind to one another, and we take the meat of the gospel and discard it and focus just on the milk that's going to be light and easy for everybody. And in so doing, we are depriving ourselves of spiritual growth. And because we're prioritizing keeping as many butts in the pews as we can. We don't want to offend anyone. We want to be welcoming and inviting to all, and not say anything that might upset anyone. So let's just only say the sweet things about the gospel and talk about Jesus loving and being a peacemaker, and we should be kind to everybody. And then we don't like, that's not wrong. Again, I just feel that it's incomplete. And I'm not advocating being unkind to anyone in particular, but it feels like we miss the mark when we're not willing to be very frank in what our position is. I did a musing months ago, whenever that was, last fall, or I don't remember, about abortion. And you look at church leaders' commentary on abortion and how it fell off a cliff, right? Because the cultural trends change, I don't know, or the members stopped listening, so God told them, the leaders, to stop talking about it, or whatever the reason is. When we don't engage in the public, we lose, I think, way more people. Joseph Smith talked about how, a religion that doesn't require the sacrifice of all things can never, produce the faith necessary unto salvation. That sacrifice is the whole point. And that is where growth lies. And when a religion is demanding and firm in certain principles, you're gonna, like the foolish virgins and the wise virgins, right? Some are gonna be with you, some are not. And we can't have a gospel that accommodates everybody and is inviting to everyone, no matter their position or views or actions or anything else, because we dilute the strength of the gospel by watering it down so that it's not a tough pill to swallow for other people. I'm not advocating being intentionally contentious or hateful or rude or anything like that. I just look at this from a higher level trend and wonder if things are a bit helter-skelter when, as a culture, we disengage for fear of upsetting someone, for fear of being canceled, for fear of having the mob come after us. I can't imagine what it's like for this April gal to be going through being a direct recipient of all these attacks on her. And so tons of people are like, oh, I don't want that. I don't like contention. I have a thin skin. I don't, whatever, right? And so they don't, because they know that if they stick their neck out there like she did, then someone's going to try and chop it off. And so again, constant disengagement. People retreat to their own shell. They shine their light only in their own home, if at all. And when we withdraw collectively, or like on abortion, when we're not, with the Catholic Church and others at the forefront of advocating, pro-life policies and just trying to change the culture in favor of life rather than this culture of death that we have. If we're not engaging, then we're not engaging because we don't want to offend people and lose members and have people leave the church, but also when we're not boldly standing for what we believe, are we really attracting the right people? I think of people, I don't know, I'm speaking very generally here, and I have a few ideas, but as a general statement, I think there are a certain type of people who are attracted to the meat of the gospel, who are attracted to the sacrifice, who see a strong church and want to be a part of that because of its rigor and its intentionality and its boldness, right? And that's appealing. And it attracts people because they're standing for something. It's like when you plant a flag and you say, who's with me, right? Some people are going to be alienated. Lots of people are going to be indifferent. But there are going to be some people who be like, yes, thank you. Someone is standing up. Someone is, doing, tell me why you're doing this. Let me learn more about, your thoughts. And we can attract people when we are firmly planted and bold. We will alienate some people, but Jesus himself said that he didn't come to bring peace. He came to bring a sword. So I don't think that we should walk on eggshells and be so sensitive to saying something offensive or something that might upset someone and thereby withdraw and disengage. And I feel like our culture very much is one of disengagement and trying to be nice. And so we don't say what we actually believe, or we don't, say what we ought to. I don't think that loving other people or loving even your enemy means that you shouldn't offend them. You could actually argue that sometimes loving someone else demands that you boldly tell them the truth, or that you lovingly rebuke them, as has happened many times in the scriptures, if that's your role, if that's your, situation. Not saying everyone should become a Samuel the Lamanite, go rebuke, everyone publicly. But within your domain, within your sphere, within your area of influence or whatever, you can love other people by still rebuking or disagreeing with what they do or believe. And I feel like maybe because of mixed signals or misunderstanding of the gospel or watering it down because we as a culture want to be just nice and contention is of the devil, we might be losing sight of the proper balance of standing for truth and defending God's law and the gospel and proclaiming publicly what we believe while still doing so, with civility, still doing so with Christ-like conduct, recognizing that it's not just swinging a pendulum one way and just saying, we're going to love everyone and be nice to everyone. Like, there is a role for being bold and standing for what you believe in. So what you do with that, I leave to you. I think it's, in our society today, a very pertinent topic because of all the loud voices advancing ideas that you and I might disagree with. And so do we withdraw? Do we disengage? Do we not want to ruffle feathers? Do we not want to, right? Or are we willing to say what we believe and recognize that not everyone's going to like that? But I don't think we're here in this life to just make friends with everybody and be nice and hold our light back from shining too strongly, lest it, be upsetting to anyone else. I think there's a better balance. We should be civil. We should be kind. We should love other people, but it should be from the source of love that we speak the truth and not speak deceptions, that we not tell lies, that we not abandon our beliefs or temper our testimonies or avoid the ramifications of the things that we believe because some people might take offense or be upset by it. Actions have consequences, and so do beliefs. And if we truly believe the gospel, there's going to be plenty of people who are going to be upset by it, offended by it, hate it, fight it, attack us. And it's what you sign up for if you're truly a disciple of Christ. This is not a gospel, as it wasn't for Jesus, of everyone being fine with it and everyone respecting him and loving him and thinking that he's civil. So why should it be any different for us? There's your musing for the day. Hope you guys have an awesome Sunday. Lots more thoughts here, but I'll wrap it there. And I'll see you next week.